glad we got such a great turnout here today. And it certainly is an honor to be able to present the daytime keynote speaker, Dr. Wayne. Dr. Wayne is currently at Georgetown University. His biography is in your handout, but he earned his bachelor's degree from the University of Rochester, his master's and his PhD from Columbia. He is a recognized expert on the American presidency, having written 11 books, several now in multiple editions, and well over 100 articles, chapters, and book reviews. His major works, of course, include The Road to the White House, The Legislative Presidency, and 2 introductory texts which he co-authored in American Government for the Politics of American Government and Conflict and Consensus in American Politics. In addition, he's authored or edited Is This Any Way to Run a Democratic Election? And The Election of the Century, and Is This Any Way to Run a Democratic Government? Lectures to international visitors, senior federal executives, college students in the United States and abroad on both the presidency and electoral politics. He's testified before Congress on the subject and advised both the Republican and Democratic national committees on the presidential nomination process. Certainly, we're here to talk today about the first 100 days of the President Obama's presidency. Kind of in an unparalleled fashion, President Obama has ascended to the White House in what may well be one of the most populous and popular elections. There are the inevitable comparisons to the Kennedy administration. Dr. Wayne's had an extensive time to express his viewpoint on that. It's also been one of what I would like to say is criticism and crisis, I think. Your criticism ranges from what I call the pragmatic, President Obama's promises not to raise taxes on anyone who makes under $250,000 a year. Of course, we had a huge cigarette tax. And the news also takes time to report what are the populist criticisms about the new White House dog, not getting him from a rescue center. We also have a time of unprecedented crisis. We've got domestic crisis. Certainly the economy is staring him square in the face. You have international crisis. I know there was some talk earlier about Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the border with Mexico, but also North Korea. As of the last couple of days, North Korea has thrown out the atomic energy inspectors and is really trying to make a stand here, certainly in an effort to test, at least in part, the Obama presidency, I believe. You also have a quasi-military crisis. Certainly the hostage situation with the Maersk, Alabama, and the rescue of Captain Phillips certainly tested President Obama and his senior staff's capabilities in that arena, and certainly making a decision to go to a military option in a civilian situation is very, very difficult for any president. But having said that, I will turn it over to the expert. It's my great privilege to present to you Dr. Wayne.
Well, good morning, everybody. This has been a very eventful morning, but it's been kind of a downer. We've heard about the recession, the job loss, the market decline, the foreclosures, the unemployment. And I've come here today with some good news from Washington. There's a new, upbeat atmosphere in the Obama White House, a free spirit, much joy and much love. But I wasn't asked to talk about Beau. So, nor was I asked to talk about that event where Republicans, independents, and Democrats participated so amicably, the Easter egg roll, although I do admire the Obama administration from showing restraint and from asking 3-year-olds their web addresses. Now, what I want to do this morning is basically ask and answer 3 questions. First of all, let's look a little bit at President Obama, the person. Who is he? What does he believe? And how does he think? Because I think we'll see great differences between him and the presidents who preceded him. Then secondly, I'd like to follow up on some of the discussion this morning by saying, what has he done and how has he been able to do it? And then finally, I thought we could go into the Q&A by looking at how has he been received so far by the American people? Do they approve or disapprove of what he's done? So let me begin with just a few words about Barack Obama. As you know, like many young people, yourselves included, The early years, the teen years, the early 20s when you get to them, are a search for who the heck you are other than being your parents' child in one way or another. And Barack Obama went through that search in high school and up to the middle, really, or almost the end of his college days. He was of mixed racial background. He had lived in Hawaii and Indonesia for a time. He mostly lived with his grandparents. And he was searching for his identity. And he found roots of his within the black community. He found roots of his in other societies. He found roots of his in Africa. But the only place he came to the conclusion where all his roots could coexist was in America. And so he sees himself as a kind of personification of the American dream. He has been given opportunities and used those opportunities to get where he's gotten today. First, as a community organizer after graduating from Columbia, then noting the difficulty of achieving from the ground up, he decided he could do better if he had credentials as a lawyer. And he got a law degree from Harvard, the same school that his father went to. And then he came back and practiced for a few years as a civil rights lawyer. Then he got elected to the state legislature for several terms. Then he ran and won the Senate nomination and the Senate election. And before he even took his seat in the United States Senate, he was asked by John Kerry to give the keynote address at the 2004 Democratic Convention. And this was a very marvelous speech, and it projected him right away on the national scene. So instead of being a new senator from Illinois, he became a national hero. And his appeal, where he said, we need to work together. We need to emphasize what we have in common rather than all the ways in which we're different and we have different interests. That appeal resonated with the American voters, with Democrats in 2007 and early 2008, and then with the electorate in the 2008 election. He won the election, I think, for he won the nomination because he ran a much better campaign than Hillary Rodham Clinton did. A campaign that utilized the new technology of the internet very effectively. I don't know if any of you attended his rallies, but one of the first things they would do at the rallies is they say, take out your cell phone. And as you know, most of you are required to have a cell phone right now, and dial this following number. And when you did that, they had your cell number. And when you visited his internet site and you gave your address, they had your web address. They've got 13 million web addresses right now, the campaign. And the campaign set up a new group called Organizing for America, and they didn't have a place to put them. So there was a nice man by the name of Kane, who is the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and he said, we have space for your 13 million names. And so addresses. So those addresses are now in the computers of the Democratic National Committee, and this is the way to reach out. He also won the primary because he advocated change. And in the Democratic primary, this is one of the few times, although 1976 would have been another, where inexperience helped rather than hurt, because he wasn't part of that community for a long time that people had lost faith with. And thirdly, as you know, and was mentioned this morning, he's a very eloquent speaker. He's very gifted. He thinks very clearly, and that helped him win the Democratic nomination. And then he won the general election, I would say, basically for three reasons. Number one, people were quite unhappy with the Bush administration at the end. The president's approval ratings were in the high 20s, which is very low. And they were unhappy with the scandals that had led to the Democrats winning control of Congress in 2006. Secondly, he won the election because there has been a shift in our partisan makeup. And since 1980 till about this last election, our parties were at rough parity with one another. In other words, about the same number of Democrats in the electorate as Republicans in the electorate. Well, because of what happened in the second term of the Bush administration, the Democrats gained about a 9% advantage, which they maintain today. And that, of course, helped Obama, as did the work that many young people did in bringing out the voters. And thirdly, I think he won not because of Senator McCain's mistakes, but he won because of the economic meltdown. And when the economy is bad, the party that controls the White House almost always suffers. And if you don't believe me, ask Herbert Hoover, if you could, or George Herbert Walker Bush, or now George W. Bush, or Jimmy Carter, because all of them lost because, in part, the economy was bad. So he became president, and one of the things he had to consider when he became president was that everybody had very different expectations of him. Because he was new on the scene, people saw what they wanted to in Barack Obama. And so in the speech in Grant Park, when he acknowledged his victory, he tried to tone down the expectations. He's not going to be able to meet all of them. Okay, he comes into the White House. There's still much hope and a lot of adulation. And he inherits this very, very difficult economic situation. And even before he became president, he tried to influence the Democrats in Congress to release part of what we call the TARP money to push up the banking industry. Okay, he becomes president, and basically here is a person who has a mindset that's very, very open. He's a very practical man. He's got a liberal heart. He's got a moderate view, and his own personal manner is quite conservative. So he's across the spectrum. And the only thing he does not like are true believers, are people who are strong ideologues or who have such firm religious views that they know the truth and you can't argue with them. He's very much of a pragmatist, and he's very much of a president who wants to govern from the center, which means people on the left and people on the right are going to be disappointed, from Jesse Jackson on one side to Rush Limbaugh on the other side. He's a very rational decision maker. What he likes to do is assemble very, very smart people around him, get into a big debate on all the alternatives, hear people out, and then he makes a decision. He does need time to make those decisions, but once he makes the decisions, he tends to stick with them. He's a very different decision maker than President Bush was. President Bush went with his gut. He went by instinct. That's what he told Bob Woodward, the scribe of the Bush administration, the court scribe. And he went with his instinct, and he surrounded himself primarily with people who shared his ideological and political perspective. Now, I don't say that the people who are with Barack Obama don't share that perspective. Of course, they do. But they're not in the same mold where anything outside of their perspective is no good and they don't want to use it. So he has surrounded himself with a lot of very, very smart people, unfortunately contributing to one of the negative stereotypes that he got from the campaign, that he's elitist. He went to Ivy League schools. He's got a lot of very smart people with Ivy League backgrounds. They had to close the Harvard Law School for a few days to get a new faculty. But basically, he's put himself into a situation where he is using the crisis in two ways. One, as an action-forcing mechanism to get Congress to work, and two, to link together many of the things that he proposed in the campaign, like health care, like education, like rebuilding the infrastructure, like renewable energy. In other words, he's looking at the economic components of these and say, we got to deal with this now. Okay. So he's come in, and what has he done? Well, when a new president comes in, he's really got to do three things. Number one, he's got to act presidential. And that means trying to throw away all the negative images that were developed during the campaign. Now, negative images always develop. I mean, you remember what people used to say about Al Gore, or Dan Quayle, or Bill Clinton, for example. Bill Clinton was viewed as very smart and very well educated. Of course, he went to Georgetown. He was viewed as very energetic, that he had great politicals and social skills. Personally, he was a little bit undisciplined. First it was food, it's always been sex, then it was furniture, pardons, now it's money. I mean, he just goes over a little bit. And do you remember the negatives that President Bush had to overcome when he became president? Well, many of you are young and you may not remember them, but there were two criticisms of George W. Bush when he won the presidency in 2000. I know I'm exaggerating a little bit there. The first thing was that he didn't have the knowledge, skill, and experience that his father had when his father became president. Democrats might state what I just said in other words, with maybe one word, like dumb. And two, he was not a particularly fluid or eloquent speaker. And so what President Bush had to do when he became president was show that he knew the issues by giving a lot of speeches around the country and by rehearsing the speeches so he didn't make mistakes. And by the end of that first 100 days, and we're now approaching those first 100 days, President Bush had established himself in the presidency. And he had presented his agenda, and the administration, despite the controversy over the election, was off to a very good start. Now, in terms of Barack Obama, there were two major criticisms of him during the campaign. One was the fact that he was inexperienced, that he only served in the Senate for a short period of time. How did he overcome that? How do you think he overcame that? When did he overcome that, for many of you? Well, I think the answer to that is in the debates, because we had 4 debates, 3 of them at the presidential level. He had 21 debates for the Democratic nomination, and you got to answer a lot of questions in those debates, and he knew the answers. He knew, remember President Bush, when he ran in 2000, some reporter, reporters play gotcha journalism. And one reporter stumped him. He asked him to name 4 leaders, foreign countries who've been in the news, and candidate Bush couldn't name them. Now, that was probably an unfair question. I think you guys follow foreign policy a little bit. Could you name the president of Mexico or the prime minister of Canada or people? You may not. I mean, President Reagan, for all his good stuff, just didn't remember any names. There was a nice British lady who he talked with, and fairly heavy-set German guy and a guy with a spot on his head. I remember once one of the White House reporters who was covering Reagan covered a meeting which the president had with a foreign leader, and this was the leader of Liberia at the time, a man by the name of Samuel K. Doe, D-O-E. And President Reagan, who was one of the nicest men you'd ever want to meet, after the meeting with President Doe, they had this joint press conference, you know, that Obama had with Brown and with other leaders, and they had this joint press conference, and President Reagan, to all these reporters, didn't think they knew President Doe, so he kept reintroducing him, except that he kept calling him Chairman Mo. And so the reporters who were there didn't know if Reagan knew he was talking to Doe or thought he was talking to Mao, who had been dead for about 11 years at that point. Now, George Herbert Walker Bush would have known the names of those foreign people because he was, first of all, head of the CIA and our UN ambassador, so he would have had two folios on them. And Bill Clinton would have known their names as well. Why am I so sure of that? Come on, I gave you the answer to this already. Went to Georgetown. According to our dean, we taught him everything he needed to know. He probably would have known the names of their spouses and daughters as well. At any rate, President Obama overcame the inexperienced thing by really knowing about what was going on. He's a very knowledgeable man. And he has a great ability to synthesize a lot of information and then analyze it. Great synthetic and analytic skills. The other thing he had to overcome was the charge that he was elitist. And his answer to that was, how can you call me elitist? I was born into a mixed racial family. My mother was on food stamps for part of the time. I went to public schools until high school and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is that there is something about President Obama, which if not elitist, it relates to his style. He can be distant. He's not as emotive as President Bush or President Clinton were. He's more around, if you told President Clinton, that you lost your home in Florida and you didn't have a job and whatever savings you had been divided in two by the stock market, Clinton would have put his hand around you, as a woman, or shake your hand and say, don't worry, we'll work about it. What Obama does is step back and he says, yes, we have these three problems here, and that's why we have to do this and this and this and this. He's much more of an analyst, a professional analyst, than he is a kind of good fellow who'll put his arm around you and say, come on, let's have a drink in one way or another. It's just not the style of the man. Okay, so he comes in, and when a new president comes in, he's got to do two other things. He's got to make a lot of appointments. There are about 3,500 appointments a new president has to make. Of that 3,500, there are about 500 that are the top appointments. 480 have to be confirmed by the Senate, and that's a tough process. And he can appoint 1,800 people in the executive office of the president. Only a few require Senate confirmation. Our appointment process has been broken for the last two presidencies, or I shouldn't say broken, it's very, very slow. It took both President Bush, George W., and President Clinton an average of 8.5 months from the time they vetted a name till the time that person was confirmed. Now, it's very hard to hit the ground running if your team is not in place. Let me give you where President Obama is at this very moment. Thus far, he has, I have the figures here somewhere. Thus far, he has made he has announced 173 people. He has nominated 126 people. and the Senate has confirmed 60 people. So for the top 500 positions, he's got about 350 to go. Now, why is it so slow? Well, for one thing, you don't realize what you have to go through to get a job with the federal government. The first thing you've got to do is you're vetted by the White House. They ask you a lot of questions. List all assets that you have in excess of $1,000 since the age of 21. Now, those of you who have white hair, like myself, would have trouble answering that question. You guys may not have any assets at the moment, and you're not that far past 21. It wouldn't be too hard. But the lowest age so far in the Obama White House is 25. And so most of you are a bit too young for that, although the internship program is available. At any rate, they also ask you if you've ever employed domestic help, like a housekeeper, a babysitter, a gardener. Remember what happened to Mitt Romney during the campaign? He had a company do his lawn, and they hired some illegal immigrants. How is he going to know? And he got criticized for that. So they ask you a lot of questions, and a lot of questions about conflict of interest. Then you have to complete an FBI questionnaire, a questionnaire from the Office of Government Ethics. You have to get a release so that your IRS records can be made available. Untold, one guy did a study of this, and he found that you have to provide the government with 2,880 details about your life, including, and this is very hard for some of us, the status and the location of your ex-spouses. Very hard. I don't know if I could do that. But be that as it may, it takes a lot of time. And then for the top positions, you have a full FBI background check, which includes a field check. And then you have a Senate committee investigating and looking at some of the same issues. So it's a very, very slow process. And when the Obama people got burned by the tax problems of former Senator Daschle and now Secretary Kathleen Sebelius and the trade representative, they didn't want to look bad, so they slowed the process down till they could get all this information so they wouldn't be embarrassed. And a lot of that information has to be provided by the person themselves. And if the person themselves, for whatever reason, doesn't see this as a problem and don't provide this information, an administration can be hurt down the road. So that's been a problem. They're proceeding on that now. They're a little ahead of where the Bush administration was at this point, but most of the political positions, the major positions, have not been filled. None of the major ambassadors who have political positions have been named yet. There are a lot of judicial positions that'll be available. We have about 856 federal judges. And their vacancies come up about 5 per month. So over time, you have judges you got to appoint. And so that's a big deal. Now, this administration allowed you to register for a job online. And they received online applications from 350,000 people. 350,000. Now, let me tell you, the way to get a good position in the Obama administration is not to register online and then sit back and say, well, they're going to see what a great person I am. Because with 350,000 people, you know, you got to know somebody to get a job. You got to have worked on the campaign. You have to have been active in one way or another or know somebody who has. So that's not the way to go about it, but they have all those things. So he's had this appointments problem, and that's going to continue for a while. Now, what else has he done? Well, he's signed 4 pieces of legislation, a law called the Lilly Ledbetter Act that allows women to discriminate if they've been allegedly subject to allows women to sue if they've been allegedly subject to discrimination. The act that most of you think is absolutely vital, he signed, to allow you to receive television signals, even if you have the analog television, until mid-June, used to be February. And then the two important pieces of legislation, the Children's Health Insurance Reauthorization Act, where they increase the number of families that are eligible for insurance through the Medicaid system, and then the big program that we've been talking about this morning, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. In addition, he has issued 10 executive orders. Most of them deal with organization that you probably wouldn't be interested in, but one of them deals with stem cell research, which is important. And he just issued a memorandum or order yesterday with respect to travel to Cuba, and that is also important. He's issued 10 presidential memoranda, and he's issued 10 proclamations, which are mostly just, this day is such and such a day, and this day is such and such a day. That's not too important. But still, he's done a lot in a very short period of time. And so the question is, how has he been able to do it? Presidents have had difficulty working with Congress. And we heard one of the answers this morning, and that is, we're in a crisis. Good times are bad times for the exercise of presidential power, given the nature of our constitutional system that divides powers. Bad times are good times for the exercise of presidential power, as long as you're not responsible for the bad times, okay? And no one could blame this economic downturn on Obama, who was, not in office. He was in the Senate, but he wasn't responsible for it. So he got a lot of power because of the crisis, and that's one of the reasons he's acting as quickly as possible. That's one of the reasons he's not going to put off health care this year. That's one of the reasons he's pushing for immigration reform, which is going to be tough. That's one of the reasons he wants what someone referred to this morning as the cap and trade bill, which is designed as environmental legislation. In other words, you strike while the iron's hot, and the iron is very hot at the moment. Secondly, he's got a big partisan advantage in Congress. 58 Democratic votes in the Senate, and soon to be 59 if Al Franken wins that very disputed Senate election in Minnesota. A lead of, 75, 80 seats in the House. So he can pretty much get through what he wants. He has the partisan advantage, and usually the way it works, if you study the presidency, is the largest partisan advantage you have is when you're first elected. Then you lose seats in the midterm, pick up some if you're reelected, and then lose seats again. So you strike while the iron's hot. And thirdly, I think this man is a very smart, persuasive man, and he has gone public, and he is using those 13 million web addresses to mobilize support. And thus far, he's gotten his budget through the House and Senate, although they have to reconcile the differences. And he's gotten this recovery plan through, and he's going to strive for a health care reform this year, as well as whatever else he can get Congress to do as quickly as he can. So it's been moving very quickly. Now, the final thing I want to address, and I know my speech this morning is the only thing that stands in the way of your lunch, and I've heard some grumblings from some stomachs here, so I know you're hungry. President Barack Obama got 53% of the vote in the election, and that's the highest percentage a Democrat has got since Lyndon Johnson in 1964. Right now, he is standing at about 62% approval. In other words, 62% of the American people approve of the job he is doing, which is higher than President Bush or President Clinton had at a similar point in their presidency. Not way higher, but still higher. Remember, Clinton had some gays in the military issue and some problems, and Bush had the controversy over the election. Now, secondly, there is a huge partisan gap in how Obama is approved. President Obama is approved overwhelmingly by Democrats. He is approved by independents, but maybe not as high a level as Democrats. But only about 34%, 1 out of 3 Republicans, approve the job he's doing at the moment. And if you compare Obama to the Republican leadership in Congress, 71% in a recent poll has confidence in Obama compared to 38% for the Republican leaders in Congress. In other words, one of the problems the Republicans had after the last election is that they threatened to become a minority party unless they broaden their base. And that problem has been complicated by their opposition to some of the proposals, the stimulus and the reinvestment proposals, and some of the budget that the Obama administration has proposed. Now, why would they say no when it's bad times? Well, there are 2 reasons primarily. One, they believe that the government shouldn't spend this much money. It accords with their ideological perspective. And 2, the Republicans who are left in Congress, for the most part, come from conservative states or very conservative congressional districts. And they're reflecting the views of those districts, which are not necessarily the views of the country at this particular point in time. So Republicans have a problem. How do you broaden your base, attract more people, and how do you provide an alternative policy rather than just saying no? It has been, over the last couple of weeks, an improvement in how people think the direction we're moving. When we ended the Bush administration, only about 13% out of 100 believed the country was moving in the right direction. And if you take Cheney out, it must have been 12%. And now you have 26%, so the figure is double, think we're moving in the right direction. So Obama has had some improvement in that. His presidential approval ratings have stayed in the 60s. As I said, 90% of the Democrats approve of him, 60% of the independents, but now actually the latest figure was 27% of the Republicans. So far at least, the American people like what they see. What they see is a smart, strong, articulate president who seems to have a sense of what is wrong. The bottom line is we don't know if what he's doing is going to work. We have not seen many signs that everything is turning around. There are a few indicators, but not many signs. If we're in the same state as we are in 2010, the Democrats will lose seats in Congress and Obama will not be at this high approval rating. If things do start to turn around, though, then the president will get even more power and have more discretion in dealing with Congress. So let me stop at this point. We have a few minutes for questions, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what he was like, what he's done, and the fact that so far at least the American public, except for strong partisan Republicans, basically approves of the job that he's doing.
Thank you, Dr. Wayne. We certainly have some time for some questions. Those of you who've been here this morning know we just have a limited amount of microphones, so if you'd raise your hand, I'll try to pick you and get your questions to Dr. Wayne. Here in the front.
Hi, it's an honor to have you. My name's Angela. Speaking of comparing presidents, from my studies, Reagan tried to nationalize steel mills, and it was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. According to what I believe I heard in the news, by Obama firing GM presidents and trying to nationalize in the same sort of way, I'd just kind of like to know where our behaviors in Congress, where they've changed so much, why there's a contradiction between Reagan and the Obama presidency now in nationalizing these.
Well, let me just first correct a small thing that you said. It was Harry Truman who nationalized the steel mills, and the Supreme Court declared that unconstitutional because there was a law on the book called the Taft-Hartley Law that gave the president the power to have an 80-day cooling off period, and he should have done that first. That's what the court said. Now, you know, in 3 cases in President Bush's administration, the Supreme Court said he went too far in setting up military tribunals, in holding people without, for a long time without the right of habeas corpus and the like. So the court does limit to some extent what a president does. Now, there's sometimes a very thin line between being fired and asked to leave. And I think in the case of the head of General Motors, the government, one of the congressmen mentioned this earlier. There's very little support among the American people for putting their taxpayer funds to help out corporate executives who have either screwed them or failed in one way or another. And so if you put it to a vote, should we help out General Motors or help out Chrysler, I think there would be an overwhelming no vote, because why should we do this? Obama didn't want to help out General Motors or Chrysler, but he feared that the recession, where the unemployment rate now is almost 9%, higher in this state, unfortunately, where 13 million Americans are un or underemployed, that if General Motors and or Chrysler failed, that would produce many more people who would lose their jobs. Not only the people who build cars, the people at the service stations who service them, the dealerships, the advertising that these companies, give. And so what that would do is make the recession much deeper, much more quickly, and it would be harder to get out of it. I don't think he's going to nationalize anything. I don't think he's going to regulate the investment firms, but he's not going to nationalize them. We've bought an interest in these firms. Goldman Sachs made money and is going to pay back some of that interest to us. And so I don't think you have a government, and he gave a speech yesterday at Georgetown, which I heard, and he said he has no intention of nationalizing companies or undercutting the free enterprise system, but he does think that government has a role to protect the people from careless, reckless, or abusive behavior by the private sector. And I think that's what he's going to do. I think the mood in Congress today is, we've been in a conservative era since the Reagan administration. And I don't think the era has changed, but while people in general have a low view of government, they look to government when they have no other options, after 9/11 and now today because of the economy. And I think that, I think that's what's going on. But I wouldn't worry about nationalization. I don't think that's going to happen.
We had someone over here to the young lady in the pink shirt there.
Hi. I had a question about stem cell research. You kind of touched on the subject. And I was wondering, with the legalization of stem cell research, if we were going to be using the actual embryonic cells from a fetus, or if we were actually reverting the cells back like they are doing in the Asian countries, like in the area, and using regular cells and reverting them back to the embryonic state.
I'm not an expert in this. I'm not sure I can answer your question. I think what Obama did with the stem cell research is the Bush administration decided that we could have stem cell research on only a few strands of the embryos that were being stored at various places. And what Obama did was to increase the number of strands. His views with respect to abortion and same-sex marriage are fairly conservative. But on the other hand, he is a proponent of trying to use all the forms that we have to improve medicine and improve the causes of many of diseases such as cancer and Alzheimer's and things like that that strike us. And I think he felt, and there were a lot of people even within the Republican Party who felt that the restriction on stem cell research impeded medical research. But that's not a full answer to your question. I'm not familiar enough with the actual stem cell research to give you a proper answer. I'm sorry.
We have someone over here.
This is stump the speaker time. So any hard question you got, throw it up here. I'll duck behind the podium if necessary. Yeah, well, you got one over there.
Yeah, hey. You mentioned the use of the internet in the election. I would just kind of like to get your take on how do you think that's going to affect future elections, and kind of what that means in the health of our democracy.
Well, I think it is very favorable for the health of our democracy. Number one, it got a lot more young people involved than they had been in the past. Number two, from the campaign point of view, this is a very cheap way to inform people and to raise money, and that's good. What the Obama people have done has been to try to keep the process going, whereby the administration is informed of the views of the American people. One of President Obama's big fears is to be isolated in the bubble that surrounds the president. You know, before he was president, if he wanted to go to a McDonald's or a health food place, he would go there. And he could go in a coffee house and sit down with people. You can't do that now as president. There are all these people around you, and they're looking for guns and whatever else they are, and he's pretty isolated. He had a big fight at the beginning of his administration over whether he could continue to use his BlackBerry. And the archivist in the White House said, well, you know, every message you get is part of the public records, and you have to save them all. And then the Secret Service said, you know, if you use your BlackBerry, people are going to know where you are, and you can be a target. Well, he won that fight, and he reads 10 letters a day that he gets. He gets about 5,000 letters a day, and they send him up 10 a day to read just to find out what other people are thinking. And so he's a firm believer that any means of communication which is cheap and direct and allows you to express your views helps rather than hurts American democracy. And we're going to see campaigning very differently from here on in because of the success the Obama people had in using the internet. Now, one of the other things that you're not going to like as much is that he raised $731 million, many of it in small contributions, so presidential elections are going to become much, much more expensive. And for people who care, the public financing system is dead unless they change the law. But we can talk about that at another time.
We have time for one more question over here on my left.
I was wondering if it was too idealistic to believe that we can handle all of these social issues and economic issues at the same time without prioritizing the economy first. And if it's just maybe a better idea to intrinsically motivate America into having the confidence to invest in the stock market and small businesses.
I think that is the objective of the administration, but what the president believes at the moment is that every major issue has a big economic consequence. And he emphasized yesterday in his speech that health care is very, very costly, and we can't solve our problems with the economy unless we can cut down and extend health care. And obviously, if we can stabilize the economy, people will reinvest. There's a lot of capital out there still. But he believes that it's all connected and that you have to sort of move on each of your 5 toes as you go along. And is he going to make mistakes? Sure, of course he will. Is all this stuff going to work? Are we wasting some dollars? Probably we are. But the magnitude of the problem is such that what the government has to show is that it's doing something and it might work. Because if they didn't, look, what are the 4 things you're most afraid of and your parents are most afraid of? Well, one is bad health, getting an incurable disease, and the costs of that and how that would affect you if you didn't have health insurance. Number 2, losing your job. Number 3, losing your house. And number 4, losing your savings. And we're in the position right now that 2, 3, and 4 have been lost for a lot of people, and it's real scary. And therefore, if the government doesn't do something, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where we have a lot to fear. Remember what Franklin Roosevelt said when he became president in 1932, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And Barack Obama remembered that, and he's trying to curb that fear by showing that the government is acting and acting quickly, and things will change. And let's hope for all of our sake that he's right. Thank you all very much.